The impossible God. God is a being who stands outside of space and time and all of existence. He is the creator of everything. Our our life, our time, our world, our universe, our concept of a universe, our concept of space and time, every single thing that we know of was created by God. It was all easy. He just spoke and there it was. What we struggle to wrap our heads around to understand was drafted at the utterance of simple words, and it came to exist. The scriptures are replete with examples of his incredible grandeur, the things that he does that stand so far outside of the plausible or possible. I mean, everything from the parting of the Red Sea, where Moses stood before it, and the waters of this small ocean split apart, and he and the Israelites were allowed to cross. They just walked on dry land, specifically dry land, not muddy, dry, to cross the sea and get to the other side. And in the process, Pharaoh's chariots were destroyed. And they found, like, there's a spot in the Red Sea where you can find the chariot, the old chariots and all the wheels and so on.
Really?
Yes. I think I still have the National Geographic from the 80s where they found it.
Wow.
And that's just one story. One of my personal favorites is in Acts 12. And it's when Peter gets captured by Herod and is sitting in jail waiting for King Herod to call him forth to probably be executed. And lo and behold, Peter's sitting there, chained between two guards, and an angel shows up and says, "Get up, wrap your cloak around yourself and walk." And he does, and the chains fall off. And he walks, and the doors open as they go, and the guards don't even see him. It's a shock to the rest of the believers who are hiding out in some house church. And suddenly Peter comes knocking on the door, and they're just like, "Haha, Peter's in jail. Who are you?" "It's me, guys. Come on." They finally open the door and are shocked. It's actually Peter. It's weird. And that doesn't even begin to address the scope of what God does and what he's capable of. His power is only limited by his will to act. So it would seem. At least that's how we believe. God is capable of so much, and yet we struggle to believe in even the smallest of things. We struggle to believe that he'll help us, that he'll save us, that he'll protect us. We struggle to believe in him as a person. I say person strictly in the context of expressing him as an entity that has his own will and being. And we don't appreciate that. Like, that's a big thing with God and us. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But, we see what he's capable of, and we struggle to believe in that. But at the same time, we also struggle to not be mad at him when he doesn't act in those ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's this weird kind of double-mindedness in a way where we say, God will never do that for me. He'll never save me from this. And then it happens, and we say, why didn't you save me from it, God? It happens all the time. I've done it so many times. Most of my life after I turned from Satanism and began to pursue Christianity, like pursue God in a sense. I was very much a churchgoer like anybody else. And I had that same problem. I didn't believe that God would provide for me financially, but man, was I mad when he didn't. I didn't believe that God cared about my wants and my desires, but man, I was so pissed off when they didn't work out. Why? Why do we do this? Like, is it like some kind of subconscious manipulation where we hope that if we hold ourselves low enough, then maybe God will take pity on us, and out of his pity, then he'll act? And then we get mad when he doesn't pity us enough to act because we didn't even bother to ask? What is that? If I'm honest, if I'm completely forthright, I've done things like that before with people. To be completely open, we all have. I don't know a single person who's never tried to use pity or lack as a means to try to get something from other people, to play on another person's empathy or sympathy in order to get something. Anything from, money, for example, or even just a hug. But but why would we do that with God? That's actually manipulation. Like, why not just ask the person for that thing? Say, look, I feel terrible. Could you please give me a hug? I just need to feel held.
Yeah.
I just need to not feel alone right now. I just need somebody to be close. But we have so many obscure social contracts and things like that we just it's considered awkward to ask people for what you need. And then of course we don't project that on God at all, right? Never. We would never ever do that because he's totally different. We treat God completely different from any other person, especially our parents. We totally treat him differently from our parents. We don't project our parents on God ever. For the record, if you've never seen one of these videos before, then you should know that if you scroll through the other videos, you will find that in every single one of them, just about, we end up talking at some point about our Christian proclivity to project our parents onto God.
Yeah.
All the time.
And other people.
And other people. But we do this all the time. It's like we want God to help us, but we don't want to ask him to help us because we don't think we're worthy. And as a result of not thinking we're worthy, we don't ask. And then we get offended that he doesn't help us just out of what? Do we understand that we are supposed to be the princes and princesses, the daughters and sons of the God of heaven and earth. We can walk into the throne room and ask our Father for help. That is the perspective that we should be carrying. Not because it's good, not because it's nice, but because it's true. It's always been true. It doesn't matter how bad you are. It doesn't even matter if you're unsaved. If you've never said the sinner's prayer, or specifically, to be more to the point, if you have never even begun to believe in Jesus, because as Jesus says, it is those who believe in him who will be saved, not those who say a prayer.
Yeah.
You don't even have to believe in Jesus to try to approach God, to try to ask God for help, because you are his kid. Like, whether you acknowledge that or not, it's in your DNA, it's in your biology, it's in the structure of your being, from your physicality, your soul, your spirit. Those are all parts of you, and those are all parts that were crafted and molded by God. And as a result, you are his child. You are royalty in the kingdom of God. But we don't act like it. I mean, it's one thing if you don't even believe. It's a whole other ballgame when you're a Christian and you walk around saying things, like speaking hype about being royalty, about being conquerors, about being destroyers of the gates of hell, about being the sons and daughters of God, about being adopted, about being grafted in to the very essence of God. We say that stuff, and we feel good about it. But when it comes down to putting our money where our mouth is, we're terrible at it. We say that stuff because we want to believe in it, not because we do. So we don't experience the impossible God who can stop time and, and heal the wounds and damages of every part of who we are. Instead, we're too busy standing at the door, feeling awkward about offering up a hand to knock.
Yeah.
And he helps us anyways, often enough. At no point should it be taken away from this message that, the things that you lack are because God doesn't want to help you. It isn't a transactional thing, and that is important.
Yeah.
Like I said, we do not treat God like a person. And I would blame... I know that this comes from centuries of the church being the way it is. Maybe not centuries, maybe it's just decades. I don't really know if I'm on I don't know the grander aspect, the grander scale of when we began to look to God and presume that our faith entitled us to his actions. I don't know when it came about necessarily that we looked at him and said, well, if I'm good, then you have to be good to me. If I behave right, if I keep the law, then you have to do stuff for me. We carry a lot of chips on our shoulders about God not being there for us. But the problem is that a lot of us don't understand that we're not there, period. Like, we're off the reservations and we're looking to God to meet us, and he'll meet us, but at the same time, he's not going to dance for us. when he meets us. He's not going to perform so he can win your heart over. He's going to do things. He's going to try to draw your attention because he wants to win your heart. Sure. But that doesn't involve a song and dance number or a lot of big flashy miracles to prove himself to you. When it becomes about you looking to God for him to prove himself, you're wrong. That's the end of it. That's not a question. That's not open for debate. There's no spin to it. If you can say things like, well, I really just want to know that God's there for me. No, you don't. You want him to do things so that you can then judge whether or not he's good enough for you. Don't lie about it. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to him. He sees it. We spend all this time, the last few messages that we've talked about are our proclivity to put ourselves in the seat of judgment for God. We exist in a world that is fallen. It's not fallen because God's punishing us. It's fallen because he left it to us. He said, okay, this is yours. You wrestle it down. You bring it to bear. That was the curse that he laid on Adam. It wasn't even a curse. It was just a statement of, yeah, this is how life is going to be. As a result, we have a very hard world. And you know what? We still think we're gods. It's bewildering. We spend ridiculous amounts of time presently fighting about how to control the weather, as though that's pertinent, as though that's going to happen, as though we have enough understanding of that aspect of life, of ecology, that we're going to then be able to put our hands on it and make it do what we want, like it's a horse. And even in that case, we look at horses as being things that we can do that with. The animal that kills the most people, like outside of insects, the most deaths every year by a non-insect animal are from horses.
Oh, wow.
Because we can't actually control them. As it turns out, if you piss off a 1,500-pound animal, it can kill you.
Yeah.
It can easily turn that whole, you control it thing around and be like, no, you don't. You're dead now. Here's a few kicks. Here's a solid stomp. You're done. It's a real thing. We're nowhere near as in control as we like to presume that we are. And that's something that we should be embracing instead of something that we're constantly fighting to try to maintain another way. But instead, we do it this way, and because we want to be gods, we have a world crafted by us trying to be gods, and as it turns out, we're kind of crap at it. It doesn't matter, even your good people, your good leaders, still falter and crumble at different points in time. Even in the Bible, you see examples of this time and time again. One of the best ones is Hezekiah. I mean, we could talk about David, who was a man after God's own heart, but Hezekiah was labeled as being there was no man more righteous than him before him. This is what was written about him in the books of Kings and Chronicles. That's how they addressed him. And that's important, because Hezekiah came after David, after Moses, after Abraham. I mean, he came after Job. Those people who were considered so incredibly faithful existed prior to him. And nevertheless, the people chronicling his life looked at him and said, this is the guy. He's legit. He stands on He stands on the shoulders of nobody. And yet, when he was ready, when it was time for him to die, and he begged God for more time and he got it, he then spent that time backsliding. I believe it was 15 extra years he was given. I don't remember necessarily off the top of my head either. But he spent it faltering in his walk. If he died when it was time, when Isaiah showed up to tell him it was time, that would have been the end of it. That would have been the story of King Hezekiah. Nobody was like him. Instead, he got his extra time, and it turns out less glorious. So even our best, it doesn't matter who it is. Even our best people falter. Even our best people are imperfect. Even like modern examples of like great Christians as that people look up to. I think it was Rafi Zacharias was a very popular Christian speaker, and many people viewed him as being just great. And then he died, and some things came out about certain truths about what he did with his money and things like that. Come to find out that no, he wasn't that great. Which hurts people. I mean, a lot of people really believed in him. And that's not necessarily to say that all of that's invalidated. All it is to say is that he wasn't perfect. But that's the thing. None of us are, and yet we're trying to be gods. We try to act like gods. We try to judge like gods. We judge each other. We judge the world around us. We judge our own capacity to control the world around us. And we woefully overestimate our abilities to do that. We presume to know all the facts. We don't. We never do. It's frustrating to me. Like, I studied biology for most of my life. I know more about, I know more about biology, ecology, zoology, paleontology than your average person for sure, and I've forgotten more about it than your average person has known their whole lives. And it's not an arrogant statement, it's a truth. But even so, I have plenty of people come up and tell me things are biological facts, and I'm just like, you don't know what you're talking about. I promise you. And if they push me, I can take them down the line and show them where they're wrong. But even in that, I don't know everything. I'm faced constantly with like the ignorance of people who think that they are justified to sit in a place of judgment. And I myself am wrong as well in doing that, because I find constantly how I'm lacking myself. It's why it's important for us to take a step back from that and be humble enough to admit that we don't have it all together. We don't have our hands firmly on the wheel here. And yet, in the face of that, we expect God to do what we want him to do. Again, like I said, we have an issue with this particular part, and that's that we, especially in America, our relationships are extremely transactional. If you're my friend, then you're supposed to do X amount of things for me, but just as much as I'm supposed to do X amount of things for you. That's the expectation. And we project that onto God, who doesn't live that way. God doesn't exist in that realm. He doesn't say, okay, well, if you do lots of good things for me, I guess I owe you lots of good things too. That ain't how that works. And that's not a knock on God, that's a knock on us. We think that way. We think that in order to show love to somebody else, we have to prove it. Why can't you just, as opposed to simply just doing things because you love somebody, we do things because we have to prove that we love them. We force it, we fake it. And as a result, we end up in really bad relationships where we're stuck to people because we're more focused on proving our love than one, recognizing that they whether or not they actually love us back, and two, recognizing whether or not we actually love them or not, or if we're just trying to prove it to ourselves. That's a weird problem to have. That's a genuinely weird problem for us to exist with. Whether or not we love somebody because we're too busy trying to prove it. That's. That's not how love is supposed to work. But we look to God to meet us where we're at. We look for him to prove his love for us by his actions. And that's the thing, is when we start looking for that, you'll find that God will oftentimes pull away from you. And that's not because he wants to leave you or anything. It's because he's not going to, again, he's not going to dance for you. He's not going to perform to prove that he loves you. He will act at different times to show you he loves you. He will act because he loves you, but he will never try to prove to you that he loves you. He just simply will love you. That's how God works. That's how love is supposed to work. It's not an act to be forced. It's something you do because you do it. You act because you love, not act to prove you love. But we don't get that. So we look angrily on at God, wondering why he's not matching our weird, twisted mentality. We're sick. We're sick and we don't know it. We're so accustomed to it that we don't see the problem. You know, we exist in a world where everyone's blind, but none of us can understand that we're blind. So when somebody comes along who sees, and they're describing the world around us, we're just baffled by that. What is color? You start trying to describe red and blue, and we're just like, what? That's not even feasible. But therein lies the problem, is that we live transactionally, we exist transactionally, we understand transactionally, and thus we believe that we are entitled to things from God. We believe that because of our faith, because of our hope, because of our goodness, it's going to entitle us to activity from God. And again, that's not the way it works. You're never entitled to God acting on your behalf. Again, God acts on your behalf because he loves you, not because you earned it. So yeah, we don't see the impossible God because a lot of us, we are looking for the impossible God. Not trying to experience God. We don't accept that he he loves us and just look to be with him. We want him to prove he loves us with extravagant actions. It's actually a significant problem within our just relationships in general. Um, there was a psychology study put out not long ago, and it talked about a very toxic behavior that's fairly common in us, in our relationships, and that is one of looking for grand gestures of love. It's not good enough to simply be able to say I love you and just sit with that love for each other. A lot of people nowadays look for grandeur. They want to be praised, to be glorified. They want that other person to show that they worship them. And maybe they would never use those words. I use those words because it's what I see. But they would say they want to be, yeah, they want to be celebrated. They want to be, they want to be, what is the word? It's like right at the tip of my tongue.
Flattered?
Flattered is good. That's one. It's not the word though. Ah. But they want that grandeur. They want that. They want that razzle dazzle. Thank you, grandmother, for teaching me those words. um, and while you could say that there's nothing wrong with that, there is something wrong with that when we start believing that we're entitled to it, or that we deserve it, or that it's something that's expected. Like, if you expect people around you to literally dance for you to prove that they love you, that's wrong. That's bad. Like, that's actually a bad thing. If you're looking for people to jump through hoops to illustrate their love for you, that's also a bad thing. That is an expectation that is unreasonable. And what's more is it all that you end up finding is you will find people who will perform for you. They will. But they will want something in return. Thus, what you have is a transactional relationship where they will prove that they love you, so that then you can go ahead and prove that you love them, and you will trade favors back and forth in order to create a false paradigm of love. And the emotional highs will be so significant that you will feel it. You will believe that you love each other. Except you won't. Because when that emotional roller coaster has to stop, because it does, someone will crash. Whether it's you or your partner, one of you will crash. And in the process of that, that's when you will find out that you don't actually love each other. Maybe you really liked all those grand gestures and you felt really celebrated. You felt really appreciated. And suddenly, now this person needs you in a capacity that doesn't involve, some grand gesture. You can't just race in and save the day. You can't just be a hero. You have to be a nurse. You have to be a maid. You have to be something that's completely unflattering. You have to dress infected wounds, or or talk through incredibly hard aspects of their sudden lack of faith or insecurities or different things like that. You have to play a counselor. I mean, even a lot of people like the idea of being a counselor, but they only do it like once in a while. It's a whole other thing when you have to come home and be a counselor every day, because suddenly your partner is going through some really deep stuff, and they can't get away from it. It's in them. and it's stopping them from being able to be close to you, and suddenly you're finding that you don't want to be around that person anymore, and that makes you feel worse because you know that they need you, and your grand gestures aren't fixing it because they can't. That's when stuff gets real. Grand gestures aren't real. They're just feel-goods to compensate for a lack of reality. And herein lies one of the grandest problems that we exist with when it comes to God, is that we exist in a realm where we're looking for feel-goods. We want God to save the day. We don't want him to be close to us when we're suffering. We want him to stop the suffering. We don't want God to be empathetic towards us. We want him to fix it. We want him to make us better so that we don't have to feel anything. And then we can just go about our happy lives, which may or may not involve him in any closeness. So yeah, we don't experience the impossible God, because the reality is that we're too preoccupied with what we're entitled to, or looking for him to prove that he's the impossible God so that we can then believe in the impossible God. And God, in all of his infinite wisdom and his understanding, because he does see everything, he sits in a completely different dimension. If we're in the third dimension and everything works the way it does, he's in like the 23rd dimension. I don't really know the number. It's probably significantly higher even than that, or lower, because maybe there are less dimensions. It's an unknown quantity. Scientists are still arguing about this, and they may never be able to prove anything about it. But the reality that we have to acknowledge is that wherever the end of dimension sits, that's where God is. Which means he is seeing everything all at once. Everything from time to consciousness. Everything. He sees through it all the time, all at once. So yeah, when somebody says God knows what's going on, that's real. Because God's seeing into your mind, into your spirit, into your soul, all the different things, all the different components that are you, are completely laid bare before him. That's the same with every other entity here. And yeah, maybe God sees that healing your back pain is not actually the thing that needs to be done, because maybe it's not actually that your back pain is derivative of sore muscles as much as it is a reaction, a response to emotional pain, a scar in your soul, or weariness in your soul. And I say that from experience. I've had this happen where I had routine back pain, and I thought I just needed to rest, and I rested my muscles, and I massaged my muscles, and I rested my muscles, and massaged my muscles. And I would feel good. And then the moment that certain very specific feelings came in, that pain would come back immediately. The feeling of being overwhelmed, specifically, was what it was. And the moment that feeling hit me, that pain would come back instantly. It didn't matter that I had spent an entire weekend plus resting every muscle in my body and taking care of myself. That pain was instantly back. Because it wasn't about my physicality, it was in my person. And that's what God had to address with me. See, the thing about God is that he sees all this stuff, he knows. So we can have a lot of different things going on, and we might think that we know what it is. We might even obsessively kind of like try to grab on to every different thing. But oftentimes, all those efforts are really just a distraction away from what's really going on. Because sometimes it's in our soul or in our spirit. Do you know how to heal spiritual wounds? Did you know that your spirit could get wounded? Did you know that there are things that can happen to cause damage to the very essence of who you are? Not to your body, not even to your soul, but to your spirit. That obscure aspect of us. You could also say your mind. That's more or less kind of an analog. I get a little foggy on which one is more associated between soul and spirit. But consciousness, that's it, not mind.
Yeah.
Consciousness is the word I mean to use there. But this can be damaged. It can be hurt by certain events, by certain other spirits. Sometimes we get into places where, the world just bears down on us in certain ways, and it doesn't crush our bodies, it crushes our souls, or it crushes our spirits. And that damage happens. And we need to recover from that. We did a video, or we did a message about a year, maybe 2 years ago, about the spiritual gifts. There was a whole series on it. And we talked about the gift of healing, and God had me go back and watch that message last week. Because it was important. And it was important to be reminded of the fact that when we talk about the gift of healing, a lot of us only focus on physical. When in reality, there's a lot of other parts of it. And God knows what we need. And the irony of it all is that we look for God to show up in this impossible way of healing this broken arm, right? But in reality, he's going to fix a broken soul, a shattered spirit, because he can do that. He can pick up every single piece and put it back together in perfection. All the while we are frustrated about the physical stuff that's not getting fixed because it can't. It can't because it's not physical. A lot of our suffering is the product of the world around us. And even though we get mad at God for not wanting to be there or God not wanting to be there for us in our minds, but in reality, he's totally there for us. It's just not in the ways that we want all the time. And sometimes we'll invalidate that. There's a lot of issue these days with people invalidating acts of love and kindness and mercy, acts of care, because they don't fix the problem. And as a result, as a result, we alienate ourselves from being able to receive what may actually help us. Because sometimes it isn't a matter of, some crazy thing. Sometimes that doesn't matter. I remember, as an example, to kind of like flesh that statement out and remove some of the vagueness, I hope, was a friend of mine who was struggling with pornography. And he had a massive addiction. In his own words, he had an addiction to pornography. He couldn't go without it. He had to have it. He didn't know why. He had to. And when he went to God and was asking, he wanted God to fix that problem. And what God showed us was that was the top of the tree. The roots of that tree spread out to a lot of different things. In essence, what was feeding that addiction were all kinds of emotional problems. Not emotional problems as well as like damage from his past. His insecurities, his feeling of being unloved, his feeling of not being good enough, his feeling of being out of control, his feeling of being disenfranchised, the effects of being abused. by people. All of these things came together to create this problem and to feed into it. So when he wanted this problem fixed, God was just like, no, I'm going to deal with all of these things, and then you'll be free. My friend didn't like that. He wanted the problem gone. He didn't want to keep having to endure that. And it was just like, God, look, if God knows that this is a problem for you and he says this is going to be my way for fixing it, I'm pretty sure you can drop the whole shame and guilt thing for what you're going through here. Because he already knows. He gets it, and he's fixing it. But we're impetuous. We all are. I'm not outside of that. I'm just as bad. I piss and moan and bitch with the best of them when it comes down to talking to God. I'm a champion. Most people don't realize exactly how much so, but God does. God knows. I am a nightmare. It's just the way it is, and there's a lot of conditioning that has to be overcome, and we all are. Like, there's a lot of grace.
He can handle it.
Yeah. There's a lot of grace and mercy there for us, because God knows. Again, he sees everything about us. We try to put on a good show, again, because we're expecting that if we look good for him, if we do good for him, we're going to get good stuff. Back to that transactional thing, but he knows better. He knows how messed up we are. And he can address that. He can fix that. There's all kinds of grace covering this whole thing. We don't appreciate that. I mean, we really, really don't. Grace, for a lot of us Christians, is just a word we use. And for most of us, it's a word we use to say, it's his grace that saves us when we ask for forgiveness, when we do all these things to earn or to achieve his grace. Even that we turn into a transactional thing. In reality, it's nowhere near, we don't have anywhere near that level of control over it. Grace is strictly a thing that God says, yeah, I have that for you. Oh, so I have to do this for it? No, you don't. It's just there. I sent my son, he died on the cross. He suffered terribly so you could have this. So it's not going to be contingent on you. I made the sacrifice, not you. And we don't understand that. Like, a lot of people, when they try to wrap their heads around that, you can literally see them go blank and get a minor aneurysm, because they're so accustomed to the transactional nature of our relationships in life. Even our parents, man. Even our parents. You have to make me this proud of you in order for me to show you that I love you. That's horrible. That's horrible. And that's not meant to be. Like, that's not meant to be a thing. This is something that's anathema to God and his creation. And that's the thing. Is like, this is what God gave me to talk about. He's told me to address this problem, because when he told me he wanted me to talk about the grandeur of impossibility that exists with him, my reaction was, I don't know that I can do that. I have a lot of pain and a lot of suffering about that. I have a lot of things where I'm angry at you still about. And his response was, then address that and make that part of the message. Well, it's a big part of the message, like most of it. And this is the reason why. because most of us exist there. I could tell you stories about what I've experienced with God, what I've seen with God. I can tell you about straddling multiple dimensions. I could tell you about, like, literally existing in 2 different dimensions at one time. It was crazy. I could tell you about seeing time slow down multiple times. I can tell you about seeing it stop. I can tell you about experiences of going to spiritual realms, going to parts of what we call hell, going to parts of heaven. I could tell you about the crazy aspects of prophecy and the number of times where God has just, like, said something and it was true. There are discoveries in science that I'm just waiting for them to find because he told me about them. And I've already had one of them confirmed. I'll never forget the one where I asked him at random, because I asked God these kinds of questions. I was like, is there an animal by chance that you created where the where the boys have vaginas and the girls have penises?
You would.
I did. I did. And he goes, yeah, I did make a creature like that. I was like, that is so weird. I wonder what it is. I never asked him any other questions about it, of course. I just, like, was just, like, shocked and weirded out. I think it was 3 months later, I get a message sent to me by my brother-in-law with a little ad, or not an ad, a newspaper article talking about the species of insect from Brazil who is exactly that. And I'm just like, it was real. Oh, right, because I asked him about a bunch of other things at that time. But yeah, I can tell people about those stories, about seeing, experiencing the reality of God and all the impossible that he is. I could talk about seeing people's futures, or rather the possibilities of their futures, where God has literally shown me all the paths that are available to them off this one choice, and the way that their decision, some of them will take them back to him, some of them will go longer. It just, how he sees us. But the truth is that most of us aren't there. I'm not even there. For all of these experiences, I still find myself more often than not being angry at God for the day-to-day suffering that I endure. And because he's not making it better. And not only that, but he's not making it better, and I'm expecting him to, demanding that he does. Even uttering the words, I have spent 10 years serving you. What was the point if you can't even bother to lift your finger to save me from a difficult situation? A lot of people would hear that and think, well, that's justified. Yeah, if you're talking to your boss. But it's not justified when you're talking to your friend, or your father, or your mother. When you're talking to somebody who loves you. Seriously, go up to your wife, or your husband, your girlfriend, or your boyfriend long term, and tell them something to that effect and see how it goes. Spoiler, it goes bad, and you end up sleeping on the couch. It's because it's coming out of a heart of expectation and transaction, and I've earned this and you owe me.
Yeah.
And that's insulting. If my wife said something like that to me, I would be pissed, livid, and more than that, I would actually feel betrayed that she existed in that state, being that person, not because she loved me, but because she wanted to call in a favor later. pardon the language for those who get upset about this, but that is fucked up.
It is what it is.
And that's how we treat God all the time. I do it. I'm not right. It's not okay. But it's happened. I with that particular thing, I actually fought that for months because I wanted to pretend that I wasn't actually that person. Like, I literally uttered those words and immediately was like, nope, never mind that. I didn't say that. I did not say that. I am not that guy.
Oops.
I'm that guy. We're all that guy. I'm that guy. So yeah, God is capable of anything. There is nothing that is impossible in the eyes of God. But he's not going to dance for us. He's not going to prove it. You don't control him. You never will. And even if you try to assert the smallest of controls, whether manipulating him through pity or trying to, subconsciously even, whether you try to earn your favors from him, none of it matters. It's all going to end up in the same boat of just you pushing and pressuring and doing your things as you look to yourself as being like the supreme judge, the supreme knower of how this should go. And as long as you hold that, you're going to be alone with it. Because God's not going to show up for you. It's not to say that he doesn't want to. It's not to say that he can't. It's not to say that he will refuse to be there. He can't really. He's kind of omnipresent. But it does mean that he will leave you to face the limitations of your being again and again and again until you finally ask him. Not try to pressure him, not try to threaten him, not try to intimidate him, not try to push him, not try to manipulate him or control him, but ask him humbly and yet faithfully as a child of his. That's what I got.